What's up guys, it's Z here. Welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Today we are updating Dark Magician. We covered Blue Eyes and now, thanks to Battle of Chaos, we also have new Dark Magician support, and every single time that we get new cards, I just don't really know what we're going to be cutting from here on out in order to main deck all those cards that Konami is going to keep giving us, because Dark Magician and Blue Eyes, we all know that we're going to keep getting support for those two decks until the end of Yu-Gi-Oh! So we might as well be prepared for more stuff down the road. So I think that this build right here is the one that those who are looking to get this deck and make it playable to the point of it being more banlist proof deck is what you're looking for, because I'm gonna say it right now, I am not playing Anaconda and Red Eyes Fusion in this particular build, and it's the same reason I mentioned in Blue Eyes where I was not playing Anaconda with Ultimate Fusion. When I play decks like these that are so nostalgic and fun and iconic, I want to be playing them down the road for a very long time, so I don't want to be cutting cards from them next to the ban list just because I was playing generic cards. The only changes I want to make in these types of decks are changes that are going to make them better due to either me changing the build for a better way or getting new support, but I don't want to have to get used to a build with a card that we pretty much at this point know that it's a 100% guaranteed ban. Maybe not in the next list, but in the ban list after, but I think it's safe to assume that we all know right now that Anaconda is a card that is bound to get banned eventually, so this is why I want to play a build that doesn't get affected much by the ban list. So if you're looking for a build that is more competitive, then this is not the one for you, for right now at least, because if you want to make the deck better, of course you're going to play right now Anaconda and Red Eyes Fusion, but for those who are looking for a more banlist proof type of Dark Magician deck and one that doesn't rely on cards that we're bored to seeing over and over again like Anaconda and Red Eyes Fusion, then this is the build for you. Of course, we're still gonna play Dragoon because this is a Dark Magician card, but we're gonna make it in other means. So, before we begin with the video, if you enjoyed, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now, let's get to the deck profile. So starting off with the monsters, we have of course 3 copies of Dark Magician. Now, you will see a lot of lists going around that play only 2 copies, and the reason people can afford to play 2 copies of Dark Magician in other lists is of course because of Red Eyes Fusion and Anaconda, because you can send your Dark Magician to the graveyard whenever you want when you have Anaconda, so you can get it back to Eternal Soul, so you don't really mind playing less copies than 3, but in a deck like this, that you don't have easy access to Red Eyes Fusion, you have to play 3 copies in order to see this card, because you need to be able to see it if you want to fuse it for Dragoon, for your Dark Magicians. You won't be able to send it to the graveyard with other means than just Magician Souls in order to be able to do your plays, because Magician Souls, most of the time, you want to be sending your Dark Magician girl to the graveyard so you can get Pot of Greed effect with your Faithful Servant, so you can be able to use your Dark Magician from the hand or from your field as fusion material, so you can get both of them in the graveyard. So I highly recommend, if you're trying to play a build that doesn't rely on Anaconda and Red Eyes Fusion, you absolutely need to max out Dark Magician, even though you're going to see a lot of people play 2 these days. We have 1 copy of Dark Magician Girl, of course. This card is here for the 2 draws for the Soul Servant, and also the ability to float with your Dark Magicians is very important, because I feel like Dark Magicians is a fusion monster that's very underrated. People just tunnel vision into Dragoon every single game, but the thing is that you're not going to be able to summon Dragoon every single game if you don't have Anaconda. So if you're planning to play this deck down the road when you know that cards like Red Eyes Fusion on Anaconda might get hit eventually, you want to be able to focus on other strategies, and the Dark Magicians, I think, is one of the best things about this deck, that the ability to keep getting more cards and the ability to float into both Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl while it's destroyed so you can get another banish with your Magical Circle, I think is absolutely broken. So we need to be able to play the Dark Magician Girl not only for the second draw with Soul Servant, but also to be able to float with the Dark Magicians, because it's a monster you're going to be summoning a lot more often very soon. Next up, we have 3 copies of Magician's Rod. Of course, this is the normal summon, searching your spells and traps that list Dark Magician, pretty standard. 3 copies of Magician's Souls, nothing to explain about this card either. You need to play 3, it's absolutely broken. Now, let's go into one of the new cards. First of all, we have 3 copies of Timaeus, the United Dragon. Now, this card is the card that's going to keep Dragoon a consistent card in the deck, even though we will not have Anaconda eventually. So, what this card does is that you can send a spellcaster monster or 1 spell and trap card that mentions Dark Magician from your hand or field to the graveyard to special summon this card, and it basically helps you make a fusion. So you can use this card to make Dragoon because it's a dragon monster, but for some scenario, if you don't want to make Dragoon, you don't need to fuse with this card, so you can use other monsters to make Dark Magicians, which is also cool. Also, because you play Dark Magician Girl, there is a fusion monster you can summon from your extra deck using this card and Dark Magician Girl, even though you might not have anything else, which is basically covering every single scenario, which I like to do when building my decks. I just want to be able to have everything in the extra deck that I can access to, especially when I'm playing a deck like this, which the extra deck is not tight at all. You can basically play whatever you want in your extra deck and it doesn't matter too much. So this is why this card gives you a lot of options, and the reason I'm maxing it is that even though it's searchable with the next card, it's a card that you want to see in combination with other cards in order to be able to do your plays, because this deck is not a 1-card combo deck. You need to see multiple cards in order to be able to do what you want, and opening this card with Dark Magician means that you will be able to go into Dragoon, but opening just it basically does nothing, so you need to max it out to see it. So even though it's searchable, I highly recommend playing 3. It's an amazing card. And next up we have 2 copies of Illusion of Chaos. Now Now, this ritual monster made the deck absolutely insanely consistent. This is one thing that Dark Magicians lacked a little bit, but this card just saves a lot of problems. And now you're going to be asking why I'm only playing 2 if that's the case. Now, if you see multiple copies of this card in your hand, it doesn't do much other than just the second copy being fusion material for cards like Master of Chaos or the Dark Magicians, which is not something that's insanely good because just this card doesn't make it the only card that you can use for those type of monsters. Now, the reason this card is a 2 is because it's searchable with Preparation of Rites. It's a level 7 ritual monster. But the thing is, if you open multiple copies of Preparation of Rites, it's much better than opening multiple copies of Illusion of Chaos, just because you can send the extra copies of Preparation of Rites to the graveyard with Magician Souls to draw cards. But if you draw 2 copies of Illusion of Chaos, if you're playing 3, you're not going to be able to do much with them unless you fuse with them, which is something that sometimes you won't even be going to do, especially if you're trying to summon Dragoon on them. So this is why I think 2 copies of this card is perfectly fine, because we basically play 5 Preparation of Rites, and it searches you all your monsters that list Dark Magician in its text or Dark Magician itself. So this is why I said you need to be able to search the pieces you're missing, which is why this card fixes a lot of the issues for the deck. For the spell cards, we have 3 copies of Dark Magical Circle. Now, this is another card that some people have started cutting to 2, and I don't really see the point of that, because it's a card that, yes, even though it can whiff, it doesn't matter too much, because it's a card you want to see that banishes your opponent's cards. Even going second, this card becomes much better, because if you combine this with a Magician's Souls or something like that, if your opponent doesn't answer this card, then they're going to get something banished eventually, so they have to act to negate it, but if they do, you can activate a second one. And the thing is that this card is a card that you absolutely want to see, and you don't really want to search, because I mentioned that this deck does not do 1-card combos, so you need to max them out on the cards you want to see, so you can see some of them and search the rest. So this card doesn't make sense playing Lissa 3, because it's a card that gives you a search most of the times. Yes, it can whiff, it doesn't matter too much if it whiffs, because what you're truly playing it for is the effect to keep banishing cards when you're summoning your Dark Magicians, so this card is absolutely important, and you need to play that. We have 3 copies of Soul Servant. Of course, this card stacks your deck, and it gives you your draws. Dark Magician Girl, it's pot of grid whenever you want, and this card, I'm playing other cards in the deck to make better use of it, because I think this card is so broken, and the effect to stack gives you more options now, because you have more cards to stack because of cards like Mayas or Illusion of Chaos, so you need to be able to use all those cards, and especially when you have your Dark Magician in your graveyard, you'll be able to draw that card, and it's why this card makes perfect sense with cards like Dark Magical Circle, because it will never whiff as long as you have this card in your hand. Also makes other cards like Upstart Goblin, which are basically a card that people play to thin their deck in 39 cards. In this particular deck, you can stack any card you want, and if you have Upstart Goblin, you basically searched any card you want in your deck, so this is why this card is absolutely broken, and you need to max it out as well. Now, for some one-offs, first of all, we have 1 copy of Magician Salvation. Now, the reason you're playing this card is because it gives you a free card to send for either Timaeus or Magician Souls. You wouldn't play it normally because the effect to summon Dark Magician Gear from the graveyard hardly will ever come up, but the thing is that this card sets your Eternal Soul and then stays on the field as a spell card that you can use for fodder, which is why this card is basically a one-off to search for fodder after you get your Eternal Soul into the field. So you have to play just 1 copy to search it, get your Eternal Soul, because you wouldn't search Eternal Soul normally, because that's what you would do, but this card gives you another card on the field used for fodder, which is why it's a decent one-off for the deck. We have 1 copy of Secrets of Dark Magic. This is the card that uses you Fusion Summon or Ritual Summon. With this card, you can basically use it to summon pretty much anything, but most of the times you're going to be using this to summon the Dark Magicians. Master of Chaos is also another inclusion to the deck that basically gives you a board wipe, that it doesn't matter too much as long as Dragoon is a card, but sometimes it will be a card that you can summon when you're not able to summon Dragoon, so this card gives you many more options. So yeah, this card, I feel like it just gives you more options, and it's searchable with Magician's Rod, so it's a one-off, so you can play it, and it's a quick play too. Now, for some generic spell cards, first of all, I was talking about this before, we play 3 copies of Preparation of Rites to search Illusion of Chaos, and if you have multiple copies of this card, you don't want to use it to search Illusion of Chaos again, unless you won't guarantee a follow-up, but most of the time, you don't care too much about a follow-up as long as you have a Circle and a Soul Servant on your field, and then an Eternal Soul bring back your Dark Magicians, because Soul Servant in your graveyard on your field will guarantee that you get the next draw you want, and then with your Circle and Eternal Soul, you keep getting monsters back from the graveyard, so it doesn't matter too much to keep a card in your hand that you want to use next turn. Most of the times, the card you're keeping in your hand is basically fodder for either Dragoon or Masquerade and Unicorn. This is what you want doing with this deck, so you don't mind too much about exactly which cards you keep in your hand. So if you draw multiple copies of this, it's best to use it as fodder for Magician Souls, try to dig for more trap cards or more combo pieces, then activate it again to get back the Illusion of Chaos back into the deck, so you can have a follow-up guaranteed, but because it doesn't matter too much in this type of deck. So yeah, this card definitely a 3-of. We played 2 copies of Foolish Burial Goods with the 1 copy of Metalphos Fusion. This is another engine that I've been enjoying quite a lot in the deck ever since Soul Servant came out, just because this card basically turns into a pot of grid during the late game, and during the early game, you can send your Metalphos Fusion if you want to draw a card, try to break yourself, but if you already have what you need, there is one more use that you can use with this card that I'm going to mention once I get into the trap cards. So this card basically has 3 purposes. It breaks you during the early game, gives you an extra interruption during the early game, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and can also give you a pot of greed during the late game, which of course is absolutely insane. We have one copy of Upstart. I mentioned this, that with Soul Servant and basically Circle, you can guarantee the card you draw with Upstart, so I would definitely play a card like this in Dark Magician just because of that fact. And we also play one copy of Call by the Grave because sometimes one well-timed dash on one well-timed Veiler can be very painful, especially on Magician's Rod, and this deck of course loses draw because it searches and draws a lot, so if people start playing draw again, especially post-siding, you need to be able to have the option to stop that at least with this one copy of Call by the Grave. For the trap cards, we have 2 copies of Eternal Soul. I think this is standard by now. I don't think you should play any less on any more just because you have your Magician's Salvation, so you basically 3 copies and you can search whenever you want, and if it's destroyed, it doesn't matter too much. If you lose both copies, it doesn't matter because Soul Servant can stack cards from the graveyard as well, so if you absolutely need it, you can just put it back from the graveyard and then draw it, so it doesn't matter if you lose both copies, so you definitely don't need to play 3, but 1 I think would still be too little because, for example, if it got Cosmic, the 1 copy, then you would not be able to use it again for the rest of the duel. We have 1 copy of Magician Navigation. Now, this is a card that people cut, but I feel like when you play Foolish Burial Goods, you get too much value out of playing this card because I mentioned that if you don't need to unbreak, there's one more use for Foolish Burial Goods, and this is that use. You can send your Magician Navigation to the graveyard with your Foolish Burial Goods and basically get an extra interruption during your opponent's turn. We can save you from cards like Twin Twisters or Feather Duster, which are the bane of this deck's existence, especially if you don't have Dragoon, because if you lose your Eternal Soul, you're going to lose your entire board with it, so you need to be able to stop these kinds of cards, and this card gives you an extra interruption that saves you from those types of cards, and it's a really good card. You are hardly ever going to use the field effect. It will come up sometimes, but not to the point of playing multiples. You just need this 1 copy to either send it with Foolish Burial Goods or discard it from your hand with Magician's Soul, so it's not a brick if you draw it even, so you can have it in the graveyard and get the extra interruption. Now, the rest of the 6 cards that I'm going to show you, you can basically replace these with any type of staple you want. If you want, you can play hand traps. If you want, you can play cards like Tactics Talent, play Droplets, you can play anything you want in for the next 6 slots. But for me, I decided that the best thing to do for this particular format is play traps that are really good going first and going second. So first off, we have 3 copies of Torrential Tribute. This card with Dragoon makes sure that you don't lose anything, but your opponent loses absolutely everything. Because you don't mind sending your Dark Magicians to the graveyard if you brought them back, because you're going to bring them back again during the following turn. Dragoon does not get destroyed by card effects, so it's going to stay on the field, and this card going first and going second is a complete blowout, especially when you combine it with the next card, which is the 3 copies of Solemn Strike. These 2 traps together are notorious for their going second power, and this is why I decided to play these for this particular build. Again, you can switch them with hand traps, with anything you want, but for me, these have been working perfectly for the deck just because I think traps are more powerful than hand traps, and in formats where the end boards are not something too flashy and you don't necessarily need to stop them from happening, otherwise you're going to auto lose. We are not in a format like this right now, especially if you're playing a deck like this because you don't care too much about Artifact Scythe. Yes, it hurts you when you're going for Dragoon, but you have other ways to play even without your extra deck, so I feel like playing cards like this in this particular deck just gives you many more options and makes your deck more powerful overall. For the extra deck, we have 2 copies of Dragoon. Of course, you need to play 2 because we play 3 copies of Timaeus. You're going to be summoning more than 1 copy in a lot of duels, so you need to play 2. Sometimes even the 3rd one comes up, but I don't feel like it comes up often enough to the point of me wanting played because I like playing the other fusion monsters as well. First of all, we have the Dark Magicians. I talked about this. I love this card. I think this card is absolutely amazing. It gives you all those cards you need, and with cards like Solemn Strike and Torrential Tribute in the deck, it makes this card even more broken because you can draw them, set them, and then activating during the same turn, so it just gives you more interruption, and the floating effect with Dark Magician Guild gives you 2 monsters on the field, and if you have Circle, it also gives you a bonus. I love this card. We also have 1 copy of Master of Chaos, which is another card that came out in Battle of Chaos, and to summon this, you need a Dark Magician or a Chaos Ritual Monster or a Blackluster Soldier Ritual Monster, but we don't play any of that here. And this is basically a card that you can tribute a light and a dark monster to banish all monsters your opponent controls, so it gives you a board wipe, and it's a 3k beater. You can even tribute itself if you don't have another dark monster on the field, so it gives you an option going second that if you bait all your opponent's interruptions and you summon this, then you can basically destroy their entire board. And if you can keep this on the field, you also have a monster that can float, because if it's destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target a spell card in your graveyard and add it to your hand, so it gives you back something even if it's destroyed, so it's a really powerful card. We also play 1 copy of Dark Magician Girl, the Dragon Knight, and this is a card I mentioned right in the beginning that I like playing in order to cover the scenario that I draw Timaeus with Dark Magician Girl, and basically I don't have a way to get access to Dark Magician, because if you draw this hand, normally it would be a brick, but because of this fusion monster, you basically get a Trident that you can discard a card as a quick effect to target a face-up card on the field and you destroy it, so it's better than nothing. It's a decent card to summon if you draw this bricky hand, because sometimes it will happen, so I like having that option. And of course, this is one of the cards that we remember back from the anime that I really enjoyed watching, so it's a card that goes, I can't summon, I'm going to play it just because of the nostalgia factor as well, but it can be useful in a lot of scenarios. For the Xyz monster, we have 1 copy of Big Eye. I don't play Ebon because I don't feel feel like Ebon does something for the deck that the deck can't already do on its own. This card gives you one more free option of being able to steal one of your opponent's monsters. I just like using the extra deck for utility for cards that do stuff that the main deck cannot do on its own, and this is one of them. You cannot take control of your opponent's monsters, but Ebon summoning Dark Magician and getting another bonus with Circle, you can do that even without Ebon Illusion Magician, so it doesn't matter too much, so this is the only Xyz I play. For the Link monsters, we have one copy of Imdak. This card is still really important just because with Secrets of Dark Magic, you can use this card, basically get a fusion if you have 2 copies of Dark Magician and you cannot draw Timaeus, because Timaeus is searchable, but your Secrets is searchable through more ways because you're going to draw some rods during the duel, so you'll be able to use this card, and you need a dragon in order to be able to go for Dragoon. We have one copy of Link Spider. This is another card to link away your Dark Magician so you can bring it back to your Eternal Soul. We have one copy of Dark. This card just gives you so many options. This card for Battle of Chaos, in any type of deck that uses Dark monsters, I highly recommend putting this card in. This Charmer just gives you the outs to a lot of stuff that decks do not have outs for. For example, this card, especially now with Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, it gives you so much value by getting it back onto your own field, and then you can destroy another card to use Enforcer's effect, and then your opponent, because they will have 100% activated Enforcer's effect once it hit the graveyard, they are forced to summon one of the bricks from the graveyard, either Celestial or Dasher, so they will not be able to use Celestial's effect Pot of Greed unless they can link away this monster that they bring back again. So this card not only clogs your opponent's fields and plays somewhat, but it also gives you really good interruption, and it's not good just against Enforcer. It can do so many more different stuff, because Dark, obviously, it's the most generic attribute in Yu-Gi-Oh! So you're going to be able to face pretty much any deck that can bring out at least one generic Dark monster, so this card is amazing, and if it's destroyed, you basically get to search one of your souls or one of your rod going for your plays. We have one copy of Masquerena. Without Anaconda, this is the monster that you're going to be summoning most of the time going first as a Link monster, just because it gives you another interruption, summoning your Unicorn, pop bouncing another card, and because of your Eternal Soul, you can protect this card from being run over before your opponent does anything, because the classic way of dealing with this card is normal summoning something and going straight into the battle phase, but if you have something to basically get rid of the monster that's trying to attack her, then you can use her whenever you want during your opponent's combo, so she can be a lot of disruptive, especially when you combine this with other cards like Trap cards or Dragoon on the field. We play the Nightmares, of course, Cerberus, Phoenix, and Unicorn. Nothing super important about these cards. You have to play them if your extra deck even is not very tight, just because it gives you a lot of options, and Unicorn with Masquerena is the best combo you can do with this card. And we play some Link Force. These don't come up often enough, but I just play them just because I have the space. We have one copy of Appaloosa. Sometimes you're going to spam just a little bit more than you would want, especially when you're going second, because if you're going second, you can end up with a Rod on the field, a Souls on the field, a Dark Magician, and sometimes you can summon a Timaeus. And if Timaeus gets negated at that specific instant and you're not able to summon Dragoon, then summoning this card is basically the best thing you can do, and combine this with Circle and your Eternal Soul, you can get more interruptions. And we also play one copy of Boreal Sword. You can play Access Code instead of this card if you want to, but I feel like the deck is already expensive enough, so I don't feel like making it even more expensive, especially for a card that won't come up often enough for me to pay the bill in order to buy a card like this. But of course, if you have already Access Code, then you can put this instead of Boreal Sword. It's going to make more sense, but it's not going to be summoned often enough for you to get it if you don't have it already. Just play Boreal Sword or play anything else in the extra deck slot. You don't really mind too much for Link Force in the deck. So yep, that's the deck, guys. This is one of those decks that I feel like it's going to keep getting better eventually, so this is why I'm making a build that this is basically a bandless proof build, because we know that Dragoon is a card that even though it got hit in the OCG, it's not going here just because of how important Dark Magicians and Blue Eyes are for Konami, so they don't want to take away specific cards that are played in the deck. Anaconda is a card that most likely will get banned eventually, so this is why I don't want to play it. But of course, if you want to make a more competitive version for the format we are already in, then go ahead and play Anaconda Red Eyes Fusion. But for those who are looking for more of a build that's going to stay like that for a long time, then this is the build for you, and I hope you enjoyed it. So if you did, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming videos, and we'll see you next time.